David enjoyed a peaceful and happy life with his wife Emma. They lived in a cozy house on the outskirts of the city, surrounded by green gardens and well-kept lawns. Every morning they had breakfast together on the sunny terrace, discussing their plans for the day and sharing their dreams for the future. Emma was loving and caring, and David considered himself the happiest man in the world. However, there was a dark shadow in this idyllic life. David knew that his father, an influential businessman with a dubious reputation, was involved in shady dealings. Although David never had direct evidence, rumors and gossip constantly surrounded his family. He tried to stay away from his father's business and not get involved in his affairs, focusing on his life with Emma. Despite these shadows, David believed that his and Emma's love and understanding could overcome any difficulties. They often dreamed of how they would raise their children, travel the world, and grow old together. Every day spent with Emma was filled with joy and happiness. But fate had unexpected trials in store for them that would threaten their happiness and force David to reconsider everything he knew about his family and Emma herself. Over time, David began to notice strange changes in Emma's behavior. She became more nervous and withdrawn, often speaking in whispers on the phone and avoiding conversations on certain topics. David tried to ignore these signs, attributing them to temporary difficulties or stress. But the anxiety did not leave him. One morning, when Emma was coming out of the shower, David noticed strange bruises on her buttocks, as if she had been whipped or spanked. He asked her about it, but she quickly turned away and said she had simply fallen. This explanation did not reassure David, but he did not insist on a conversation to avoid creating more problems. A few days later, during their usual breakfast on the terrace, David noticed another bruise, this time on Emma's neck. This bruise looked particularly suspicious, as if it had been caused by lips. Emma again tried to joke and explain it as an accident, but her eyes revealed her anxiety. The more time passed, the more David felt that something was wrong. Emma often went to meetings she hadn't mentioned in advance, and returned late, smelling of men's cologne and avoiding his questions. He began to suspect that something much more serious than stress was behind her strange behavior. These troubling signs gave David no peace. He couldn't shake the feeling that his wife was hiding something from him. These suspicions began to gradually erode his trust in Emma, forcing him to seek answers to questions he was afraid to ask. One evening, while Emma was in the shower, David decided to tidy up their bedroom. Sorting through her things, he came across a small envelope hidden between the pages of a book on the bedside table. His attention was drawn to how carefully this envelope had been hidden. Opening it, David found a note inside with neatly written words.
Meet me tomorrow at 8 p.m. Don't forget to bring the latex costume, bunny mask, and your best lingerie.
He froze, reading the lines over and over again. What could all this mean? Why did Emma need to bring such things to a meeting? These words triggered a flood of suspicions and questions within him. What kind of meeting was being planned? And why did it require such an unusual outfit? With each passing second, David increasingly realized that something very suspicious was happening. David decided not to waste any time. He knew that simply asking Emma would be pointless. She would find a way to evade the answer or lie again. He resolved to follow her to find out what was really happening. He understood that this might destroy their relationship, but he couldn't allow himself to live in ignorance. This accidental discovery became a call to action for him. David realized that he now had to uncover the truth, no matter how bitter it might be. Ahead of him lay a revelation that would forever change his life and his relationship with Emma. At the designated time, David followed Emma, trying to maintain a safe distance. She walked down the street with a confident stride, wearing a short skirt and a tight blouse. David noticed that she wasn't wearing any underwear under the skirt, and all the passers-by could see her bare body under it. This was entirely unlike his usually modest and reserved wife. Emma stopped at the entrance to a hidden club, glancing around. At one point, she turned in a way that she almost saw David, standing in the shadows around the corner. David's heart raced, and he quickly stepped back, trying not to reveal himself. He managed to remain unnoticed, but this incident only heightened his anxiety. He waited until Emma went inside and cautiously approached the door. Finding a secluded spot from where he could observe what was happening, David saw his father meeting Emma. They hugged and shared a passionate kiss. His father gently stroked her cheek, and they headed deeper into the club together. David couldn't believe his eyes. Seeing his wife and father behaving like lovers made him feel as if the ground was falling out from under him. Shock and anger overwhelmed him, but he knew he needed to learn more. He continued to watch, trying to remain unnoticed to miss no detail. His father and Emma disappeared from view, leaving David alone with his thoughts. Questions swirled in his mind. How long had this been going on? Why had Emma betrayed him? What should he do now? The shocking discovery changed everything in David's life. Now he had to decide what to do next and how to cope with this betrayal. After the shocking discovery at the club, David couldn't find peace. It seemed to him that the world was falling apart around him. Wanting to learn more, he decided to follow Emma again. The next day, when Emma said she was going to meet friends, he knew it was another lie. David put on inconspicuous clothes and followed her at a safe distance. Emma headed to an upscale hotel on the outskirts of the city. David froze in the lobby, watching his wife check in at the reception desk. He followed her down the corridor, trying to remain unnoticed. The door to the room she entered was slightly ajar, and David cautiously peeked inside. Inside, he saw his father sitting on the edge of the bed. Emma stood in front of him, and they exchanged short remarks. David's father slowly reached out and began stroking Emma's leg, raising his hand higher and higher. She didn't resist, on the contrary, it seemed to excite her. David watched as their actions became more and more explicit and passionate. Events were moving quickly. David's father stood up and came close to Emma. He gently ran his hand down her thigh, then down her back. David felt his heart beating in a frantic rhythm, but he couldn't look away. Emma began to slowly undress right in front of his father. She removed her blouse and skirt, leaving her completely naked. Then Emma pulled the latex suit out of her bag and began to pull it on. The suit fit her body tightly, emphasizing every curve. David froze in his hiding place as he watched his wife pull the suit on, standing in front of his father. Her movements were slow and provocative, as if she was savoring every moment. Once the costume was on, Emma put on a bunny mask, completing her look. David's father watched her with frank admiration and lust. Their movements and looks betrayed a deep emotional and physical connection. David was in shock. He could hardly believe his eyes. Everything he saw turned his world upside down. He felt betrayed, deceived, and humiliated. It was hard for him to accept that his wife and father were engaging in such intimate and bizarre rituals right before his eyes. David stood holding his breath, watching through the ajar door. The events in the room were unfolding rapidly. Emma, clad in a latex costume and bunny mask, was clearly enjoying David's father's attentions. He continued to gently stroke her leg, his hands exploring every curve of her body. David's father walked up close to Emma and began whispering something in her ear, while his hands slid down her body, causing her to become visibly aroused. David saw his wife close her eyes, throwing her head back, giving herself completely to the moment. He felt mixed emotions: anger, jealousy, pain. But there was something else he couldn't immediately understand. As David's father began to slowly undress, Emma continued to move beside him, her movements smooth and seductive. Their closeness and intimacy was so obvious that it awakened unexpected feelings in David. He felt a strange excitement rise up inside him, caused by the taboo and shocking nature of what was happening. David was confused. He couldn't understand why watching this betrayal was causing such conflicting feelings in him. He wanted to look away, but he couldn't. His gaze was fixed on every movement of Emma and his father. In the hotel room, the atmosphere was heating up. David's father continued to caress Emma, their bodies intertwined in a passionate embrace. As David watched, he felt his own body responding to what was happening, which made him even more confused. It was beyond his comprehension to see his wife in the arms of her own father, realizing that it not only hurt him, but also aroused him. David realized that he had to make a choice: stay and watch further events unfold, or leave to preserve what was left of his sanity. The events in the room continued, but David already knew that his life would never be the same. He felt betrayed and humiliated, but at the same time, in some strange way, This sight drew him in. He knew he had to do something about it, but he was paralyzed by his conflicting feelings. At some point, his anger and jealousy took over. Unable to hold back, he flung open the door and stormed into the room. Emma and his father froze at the sight of him. David rushed towards Emma, his face twisted with rage.
How could you?
He shouted, tearing the latex suit off her. Emma tried to resist, but his fury was stronger. David's father rushed to help Emma, and a fight broke out. David and his father exchanged blows, ripping clothes off each other and leaving scratches and bruises on their bodies. The battle was fierce and relentless. Both men fought with rage and desperation, but neither could claim victory. Blood flowed from their wounds, their breathing was heavy, and their strength was waning. Emma stood aside, shocked and terrified. Finally exhausted and bloodied, they stopped fighting. David, breathing heavily, looked at his father and Emma. He realized he could no longer stay there. Without a word, he turned and left the room, leaving the lovers in their humiliation and shame. David walked down the hotel corridor, feeling the anger and pain gradually give way to emptiness. His life had changed forever, and he knew he faced a difficult path to healing. But one thing was clear. He could no longer stay near those who had betrayed him. David returned home feeling shattered and empty. He closed the door, leaned against the wall, and slowly slid to the floor. His body ached with pain, but the wounds on his body were nothing compared to the agony tearing apart his soul. Again and again, scenes he had just witnessed replayed in his mind. His wife, his father, two people he trusted most in the world, had betrayed him in the cruelest way possible. David couldn't understand how this could happen. Where had he gone wrong? Why had Emma done this to him? Every time he tried to find answers, his thoughts circled back to one thing. He still loved Emma. Despite her betrayal, despite the humiliation and pain, he couldn't simply stop loving her. This love was both his curse and his salvation. On the other hand, his respect for his father was shattered. The father he had always looked up to as a role model had proven capable of such betrayal. David felt his world crumbling, unsure how to piece together the shards of his life. He needed to make a decision. How to move forward. Forgiveness seemed impossible, yet hatred and anger brought no relief. He was torn between wanting to forget everything that had happened and the need to find justice. David began grappling with moral questions. What does it mean to be faithful? What does it mean to be betrayed? How could he trust people after such betrayal? His inner world was full of contradictions. He tried to find a balance between his feelings and his moral convictions. He also realized he had to find a way to live on despite the pain. The inner struggle was unbearable, but David knew he couldn't allow himself to drown in despair. He started thinking about what he needed to do to begin the healing process. One of the first steps was accepting that he could no longer return to his old life. He needed to create a new reality where betrayal wouldn't dominate his thoughts. It wasn't easy, but David resolved that he would manage. He understood he needed to sort through his emotions and moral dilemmas to regain inner peace. Perhaps he would need help. Perhaps he would need to talk to someone who could understand his pain and offer support. David decided not to jump to conclusions. He knew that a long journey to healing lay ahead, and he was ready to take it to find answers to his questions and regain the meaning of life. David returned home feeling shattered and empty. He closed the door, leaned against the wall, and slowly slid to the floor. The wounds on his body were nothing compared to the pain tearing his soul apart. He replayed the scenes he had just witnessed over and over in his mind. Emma and his father, two people he trusted more than anything in the world, had betrayed him in the cruelest way. Where had he gone wrong? Why had Emma done this to him? Despite the betrayal, he still loved Emma. That love was his curse. On the other hand, his respect for his father was destroyed. The father he had looked up to as a role model turned out to be a traitor. David was torn between the desire to forget everything and the need to find justice. The internal struggle was unbearable, but he knew he couldn't allow himself to sink into despair. He needed to create a new reality where betrayal didn't dominate his thoughts. He understood he had to deal with his emotions and moral dilemmas to find inner peace. He might need help. Perhaps a conversation with someone who could understand his pain. David decided not to jump to conclusions. The long journey to healing lay ahead, and he was ready to take it to find answers and regain the meaning of life. David realized he needed to go all the way to uncover the truth. He hired a private detective to conduct his own investigation and find out the true nature of Emma's and his father's relationship. A few days later, the detective returned with a report. David anxiously unfolded the papers and began to read. The first thing that caught his eye was the frequent meetings between Emma and his father in various locations. But then it got even worse. The detective revealed that Emma's and his father's relationship was not only romantic, but also criminal. Emma was forced into the relationship due to blackmail. David's father had threatened her family to make her his accomplice in his dark dealings. David was stunned. His father had used Emma to cover his crimes, involving her in dangerous and illegal activities. These revelations filled David with rage, but also with an understanding that Emma might have been a victim of circumstances, rather than just a betrayer. He realized that the situation was much more complicated than it initially seemed. Inside him, two emotions were battling: anger at Emma for her deceit, and compassion for her as someone trapped in a desperate situation. David understood that he needed to act cautiously to expose his father's crimes and help Emma break free from his control. Now, he had a goal: to deal with his father's crimes and find a way to protect Emma. David knew this wouldn't be easy, but he was ready to fight for justice and a new life free from lies and betrayal. After David stormed into the hotel and fought with his father, he could no longer hold back. Returning home, he waited for Emma, determined to sort everything out once and for all. When she entered, her face was pale and tense.
How could you do this? What made you betray me with my own father?
Emma, in tears, tried to explain, but David interrupted her.
I don't want to hear excuses. I want to know the truth.
He blackmailed me,
She cried in response, her voice trembling with emotion.
your father. He threatened my family. He said that if I didn't comply, he would destroy them. I had no choice.
David froze. His anger began to turn into confusion.
Why didn't you tell me?
He tried to keep his composure, but the pain in his voice was evident.
He said that if anyone found out, my family would suffer even more.
Emma sobbed.
I was trapped. Every time I tried to leave, he increased the pressure.
David felt his world collapsing. He was torn between anger at Emma and despair over his father's actions. He wanted to scream, to accuse, but he saw that Emma was also a victim in this situation.
So, you did it to protect your family?
He asked with difficulty, looking into her eyes. Emma nodded, her face contorted with pain.
I hate myself for it, but I had no other choice.
David realized he had a difficult decision to make. He could continue to blame Emma, but that wouldn't change the past. Instead, he needed to find a way to expose his father's crimes and free Emma from his control.
We need to do something,
he said, trying to stay calm.
We need to expose him, or he'll keep doing this indefinitely.
Emma nodded, her eyes filled with hope and gratitude. Now they had a common goal: to expose David's father's crimes and break free from his manipulation. Together, they began to develop a plan of action, knowing that a difficult and dangerous fight lay ahead. David and Emma understood that they needed to act quickly and decisively. They devised a plan to expose him, gathering all possible evidence against David's father. The detective provided additional materials that indicated his involvement in various crimes, including blackmail and threats. In the evening, when David's father was at home, they decided to take the decisive step. David, full of determination and anger, approached his father's house. Emma walked beside him, her face showing a mix of fear and resolve. David's father was surprised to see them together. He tried to stay calm, but worry was evident in his eyes.
What's going on here?
He asked, trying not to reveal his anxiety.
I know everything.
David began, his voice firm and cold.
I know how you blackmailed Emma and forced her to participate in your dirty dealings.
David's father tensed.
You don't understand what you're talking about. Leave before I call the police.
The police?
Emma stepped forward, her voice trembling, but she didn't back down.
We've already given all the evidence to the detective. They will be here soon.
David's father paled.
You think you can stop me? I'll always find a way out.
Not this time.
David said firmly.
We won't let you ruin other people's lives anymore.
David's father tried to approach Emma, but David stepped between them.
Don't touch her,
He said threateningly.
You won't be able to hurt her anymore.
At that moment, detectives and police officers entered the room. They arrested David's father, reading him his rights. He looked at his son with rage and hatred but could do nothing. His crimes had finally come to light. Emma and David watched the scene with a sense of relief and satisfaction. Now that their tormentor was apprehended, they could start a new life. David felt a heavy burden lift from his shoulders. As the police took his father away, David hugged Emma. They knew that ahead lay a challenging path to rebuilding trust and creating a new life. But now they were ready for it, understanding that together they could overcome any obstacles. After David's father was arrested and all formalities with the police were completed, David and Emma returned home. The silence of the house was deafening, but there was something comforting in it. Both understood that a long road to recovery lay ahead, but for the first time in a long while, they felt free. Emma approached David and quietly said,
Thank you for believing in me.
He hugged her, and they stood there for a few minutes, feeling the tension gradually leave their bodies. David gently ran his hand over her face, looking into her eyes.
I love you no matter what. Let's start over.
Emma nodded, her eyes filled with tears, but this time they were tears of relief and joy. She stepped closer, their lips meeting in a passionate kiss. The kiss quickly grew more intense and liberating. David felt all the pent-up aggression and anger rising within him. Gently but resolutely, he lifted Emma into his arms and carried her to the bedroom. There, without wasting a second, they began to shed their clothes, revealing their bodies and souls to each other. The lovemaking was violent and passionate. David released all his accumulated aggression, turning it into passion and desire. Emma responded with the same intensity, savoring every second. It was an act of reconciliation, of release and new intimacy. They were rediscovering each other, realizing that only together could they overcome everything. When they finally lay in each other's arms, their breathing gradually calmed. David stroked Emma's hair, feeling their hearts beating in unison.
We'll make it.
He whispered.
Everything will be different now. We'll start a new life.
Emma smiled, her face glowing with happiness and contentment.
I know, and I'm ready to walk this path with you.
They knew that there would be difficulties and trials ahead, but now that they had dealt with their past, they had the opportunity to build a new future. David and Emma decided to live honestly and openly, supporting each other in tough moments and enjoying the happy ones. This new path was their redemption, and they were ready to walk it together, hand in hand. Everything that had happened only strengthened their bond, and now they looked to the future with hope and confidence.